Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of March of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting details and updates, so let's start. And the most interesting updates are coming from the borderlands between Sumy area, Kharkiv area from Ukrainian side, and Kursk region and Belgorod region from the Russian side. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians conducted an offensive operation with the purpose to establish control over some villages, territories, maybe some, hills, strategical hills, and so on. And according to the Ukrainian sources, they managed to achieve the goals they had. And when talking about the Russians, they are saying that Ukrainians were completely defeated and having significant losses were forced to fall back. So to understand who is telling the truth, who is lying, of course, we will start moving all from one city to another, trying to understand the exact situation in this or that city. First, let's start from the northern direction. We're going to talk about the village by the name of Tiotkino. This is it. We have, as you can see, 4 geolocations, 5 geolocations from the territory. So let's start from the beginning. The first geolocation we received from this area was the Russian armored vehicle that the Russians hide somewhere between the trees, and the Ukrainians discovered this armored vehicle, and as a result of FPV drone strike, that armored vehicle was probably damaged and later destroyed. So that was the first geolocation we received from the territory, which confirms that there are still no Ukrainians in the town, at least by the time the video was made, and that there were presence of Russian forces inside of the village. Later we got additional video from the borderlands, from the border. This video shown us the destroyed building, the fire on building, and the Ukrainians are saying that this video shown us that the Russians managed to reveal the Ukrainian positions in the area, and after that they start bombing this territory and they managed to set the building on fire. So based on that video we can make a conclusion that very likely the Ukrainians during the first phase of attack managed to enter the outskirts of the village, but not to get deep inside of this stronghold of this town. Later we got additional video, this one. On this video, according to the Ukrainians, on this video we can see how the Russian soldiers, Russian forces were running away from the line of combat contact. As you can see, most of them without rifles or something like this. Maybe that was just the territory defense brigade or something like this. The Russians were running from the line of combat contact, and in the final part of the video we might see the Ukrainian soldiers very carefully, step by step, entering inside of the village. This is the Ukrainian soldier with rifle. This is the second one. They're moving towards the former Russian positions, and this is the situation in the area. So based on that video we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians during the day managed to bypass this territory and to enter Tiotkino from the central part of the stronghold. So based on all these geolocations, we can make a conclusion that very likely that during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians entered the stronghold, the Tiotkino, from 2 directions, from the southwest and from the south central part, and as a result of those attacks they managed, at least for some time, to enter this village from different directions. Later, right before I start making the video, we got the final confirmation from the Russian soldiers, from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. On this video we can see the Russians were moving through the town. This video was made few hours ago, and on this video we can see, this video was made by the Russian sources, by the Russian side. On this video we can see that everything is stable in the town, that there is no Ukrainians inside of the town, no clashes, no explosions, no, there are civilians moving from one part to another, so there is no risk, which completely confirms that by the end of the day the Russians, as a result of counter-offensive clearing operation, managed to return complete control over the town. On this video, for example, we can see the Russians from the special services that were moving from one street to another, trying to find probably some abandoned Ukrainian sabotage groups or soldiers, but as I understand, before the beginning of the night everything was cleared by the Russians and secured. Important note that I would like to pay your attention, because most of the sources were talking just about the progress and whether the Russians control or the Ukrainians. I would like to point your attention to much more interesting situation, and today we will also discuss the groups and the squads or brigades or battalions of Ukrainian forces who was involved in this or that direction. If we once again take a look just a few seconds of each video, pay attention to the bottom line of the screen. This is the, let's say, the sign of Russian forces, proxy Russian forces, who serves for Ukrainian forces. They are pro-Ukrainian. They're fighting against Russia, let's say against Putin Russia. This is another, let's say, Russia, let's call it like this. And this group has the name of Free Russia. So it's just the squad of Free Russia. We have one video of them, we have the second video by them, and we have the video when they were entering the town from the central part. Free Russia was responsible for offensive operation on Tiotkino direction. Now we are moving further, and these clashes took place between Sumy and Kursk region. Now we are moving to Belgorod area. As you can see, we have significant number of geolocations. Every single geolocation means something. Before we start discussing the area, first I would like to note that after the situation was stabilized in this area, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation published their own short report about the situation. They published two reports during the day. The first one was published somewhere at 1 p.m. the local time, and the next one was published, let's say, at 8 p.m. And according to that report, the Ukrainians during the day lost more than 234 soldiers, 7 tanks, 3 US-made Bradley's infantry fighting vehicles, and 2 armored personnel carriers. So significant losses, and the Russians noted that there were 3 main directions of Ukrainian attack. The Ukrainians were attacking in direction of the city or by the name of Adarrobova, Kharkiv area. So it was in the area of Adarrobova. The Ukrainians were moving to the Russian positions. And on that direction, the Ukraine lost 60 soldiers. The next area of attack was the area in the vicinity of the village by the name of Nikhateyevka. The Ukrainians lost 45 soldiers. And the third area, of clashes were around the village by the name of Spodaryushino. The Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers. So now let's back to the map, and let's say find every single village, trying to understand the configuration of Ukraine attack. First, as you can see, the first concentration of icons took place in this area, and this is the village by the name of Spodaryushino. This is it. And according to the Russians, the heaviest losses the Ukrainians got exactly on this direction. According to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians on this direction lost around 100 soldiers. From this area, we have just one video. Just a second. There is like a commerce. Just a second, and let's go. On this video, we have few videos of Ukrainian armored vehicles. As you can see, the Russians, let's say, revealed the Ukrainian redeployment of forces. They were tracking them and following them, and after that, the Russians start, let's say, heavy strikes against the Ukrainian armored vehicles, and as a result of those strikes, the Ukrainians lost everything from this direction. Once again, 100 soldiers. But from the other side, we have report from the Ukrainian sources that when the Russians met the Ukrainians, they start running away, saving for their lives. Once again, we've just discussed the same story in the vicinity of Tiotkino, the town in Kursk direction. I would like to note that mainly the borderlands were under protection of Russian territorial defense forces, and sometimes they don't have enough of manpower, they don't have enough of firepower to stop even a single, let's say personnel carrier. I'm not talking about even tanks. So most likely, when the Russians, let's say, revealed the Ukrainian movement, they made a decision, the only correct decision, to fall back towards, let's say, the central part of the town, and to allow the main Russian army to replace them and to clear the area. So this is the situation in this area, and I would like to point your attention that this video was made by another Russian proxy Ukrainian group that serves in Ukrainian army, and this is RDK, Russian Democratic Corps. So as you can see, this is the second group that was involved in today's offensive operation. Once again, the first the first group was attacking in Kursk direction. That was Free Russia forces, and this is Russian Democratic Corps, and this Russian Democratic Corps was responsible for attacking direction Spodaryushino, and they had the biggest losses, the heaviest losses. That attack, so basically, if we turn back on map, the Ukrainians, the Russian Ukrainians, let's call it like this, were attacking along this line, and we also have additional video also from the Russian Democratic Corps. The tank of that group was attacking the Russians from from the south. There was a tank who entered the fire positions, and from the hidden position was attacking the Russian forces inside of the village Mokraya Orlovka, probably inside of these farms and barracks, and inside of Spodaryushino as well. When the tank was out of ammo, the tank returned back to the base, to the mainland on the territory of Ukraine. So that was approximately the second area of Ukraine attack. So based on these two geolocations, we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians haven't managed to to get deep inside. Very likely there was just clashes along the border, and once again they had significant losses and were forced to fall back. And I'll explain to you why on this direction probably the Ukrainians had the biggest losses in comparison with two other directions. Furthermore, we got a report that there was very heavy clashes on the line in the area of the town by the name of Adarrobova, this one. We don't have any geolocations from the territory, let's say geolocations showing us, let's say, significant progress, significant clashes or something like this. But according to information we have, on this direction, the Ukrainians involved the third group of Russian forces by the name of Siberian. So Siberian group. We have one geolocation. This is it, Siberia. This is like a bear on their, let's say, on their signs. This is Siberia, let's say, Corps, Siberia Brigade or Battalion, and they were responsible for the area to the south of the previous one and further to the village by the name of Adarrobova. So that was their area of responsibility, and according to information we have, this brigade lost up to 60 soldiers in the area of Adarrobova. So the main area of attack of their attack took place here. Probably they were trying to penetrate the Russian defense belt, but they were stopped somewhere here, and after having losses were forced to fall back towards the Ukrainian territory. There was another attack in this area, but on this video, for example, we can see from some soldier of this Siberia group, he was filming the, let's say, some facilities, some military facilities on the border, and according to him, he said that the Russians left the territory and they abandoned the territory. But for example, from this video we can't see where exactly the Russians were running or something like this. Maybe it just was speculation, but for some reason the Ukrainians haven't conducted any attack on this line. I can't tell you for sure. Maybe there were some barriers or something like this. And the final area of Ukrainian attack took place in the vicinity of the village by the name of Nikhatievka, this one. We got the biggest number of geolocations exactly from this territory, and the Ukrainians from this territory were using significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, personnel carriers. We have lots of geolocations, and this is one of the most interesting. On this video we can see how the Ukrainian tank was destroyed right exactly on the borders. Pay attention to the tank was completely clear as if he was produced just yesterday, and after he was produced he was sent to the line of combat contact. Fully loaded tank, completely fully let's say upgraded with this few lines of defense equipment like contact defense belt, and this tank got on mine, was damaged, and very likely after the clashes the Russians evacuated this tank for their purposes. Very weird moment, and very expensive and very well prepared tank, to tell the truth. Very rare model, I would say, even. So the tank got on mine and was destroyed, and later we got additional videos from this area, let's say the same video, the same story, the same clashes, but a wider video, bigger video that describes more additional episodes, additional moments from the clashes. On this video we can see this border detachment, border facilities, and we see lots of smokes, a lot of explosions. We can see some soldiers running from one building to another. Can't to tell the truth which forces were filming, maybe the Russian, maybe the Ukrainian. We see the abandoned tank or some personnel carrier that brought the troopers in the area. So the clashes were very heavy. We have some explosive, some explosions. Probably the Russians attacked the territory with Ka-52 or artillery. We have additional smokes, we have additional smoke screens, clashes, and so on. And to tell the truth, we don't have any reports whether the Ukrainians managed to bypass the area or not. Important thing about the territory is that we don't know what kind of group was responsible for this attack. So once again, the northern and the Kursk direction was under responsibility of Free Russia. The central part, the area of Spodaryushino, the the area of responsibility of Russian Democratic Corps. A little bit to the southeast is the area of Siberia Group. This area, we don't have any videos from them, so we can't tell for sure who was responsible for this attack. But we have interesting, let's say, videos of, not videos, but photos of fire anomalies. This is the fire anomaly from this territory that show us where exactly and how exactly the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions. So there are two areas of fire anomaly in the vicinity of Nikhateyevka. So the Ukrainians were attacking something like this. This was the first, let's say, area, and this area was under very heavy Russian fire. So while the Ukrainians trying to bypass the territory, the Russians were bombing them, and some armored vehicles were damaged and destroyed. And the second area of Russian concentration of artillery fire took place in Vysoka Yaruga. Probably this is the hill that Ukrainians were using to, let's say, support their offensive with artillery. And probably the Russians managed to reveal the Ukrainian positions and to destroy these positions with counter-artillery fire. Now the most important question, how the Ukrainians managed to attack, why they was successful probably in Tiotkino and less successful here. And before we continue, when talking about Nikhateyevka, also before the end of the day, the Russians from the area published the video that they managed to restore complete control of the village. The Russian journalists were moving, as you can see, completely safe, secure situation, no clashes, no explosions, no sounds from the bullets, so everything was stabilized and cleared by the Russia. So the Russians by the end of the day managed to restore control over almost every single square meter on the territory of Russian Federation. Now let's discuss the tactics that Ukrainians were using and how the Ukrainians tried to implement their attack. And I thought a lot. I tried to find the key logic in Ukrainian attack, and a few hours ago I found possibly the solution, the explanation of Ukrainian attacks. Basically, the Ukrainians chose the directions of attack along the railways. So they were trying to attack the Russian positions and to stick as close as possible to the railways. And the main reason of that, they wanted to be flexible, mobile, and very fast. So they didn't have time to redeploy forces through the fields, and they didn't have time to move convoys through the fields because they understand that they would be revealed in this case and basically destroyed. But when talking about the railways, they had possibilities to bring their forces as fast as possible, let's say from Kharkiv to Kazachia Lopань, then to land the tanks here and start offensive operation. And why I think so and what makes me think this is the video of main artillery strikes. And the main artillery strikes, for example, in the vicinity of Nikhateyevka, took place exactly in the fields from the railways, from Kazachia Lopань, from this railway station, logistic hub towards the Russian positions. If we move a little bit to the east, in the area of Adarrobova, the area where the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, as you can see, once again the same story, the railways, and after the Ukrainians landed their soldiers, they start offensive operation. And the main purpose of the Ukrainian attack was not to capture the territories, but to move along the railways, because they understand that this is the only way how they can support any attack just along the railways by increasing the logistic roads. So I'm not sure that the Ukrainians had something like this, like a plan, but to move along the railways, at least increase their chances to complete the offensive successful. So when talking about this territory, we also see the railway. This is it, and this railway was moving further to Belgorod. So moving along the railway allowed the Ukrainians to stay flexible, mobile, and very fast. And there is one area where the Ukrainians had significant losses. The biggest losses the Ukrainians had in the area of the city by the name of Spodaryushino, this one, 100 soldiers. And the main reason of such a heavy losses is that there were no railways in the area, so that's why the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy forces in this area, let's say from the town by the name of Kurikivka through the fields with the convoys, which obviously were revealed by the Russians, discovered by the Russians, and they allowed them to concentrate on the borders and then they destroyed them. So this is the reason of the biggest losses from the Ukrainian side. And when talking about the village by the name of, let's say, Tiotkino. The same story. There is another railway. This is it. And this railway allowed the Ukrainians to redeploy forces very fast, to land them in Ryzhikovka, and after that to start offensive operation inside of the village. So that was the reason of Ukraine attack, the main approach they were using to implement these operations. But anyway, this didn't help them to finish the mission successfully. During the day, the Ukrainians also made a lot of attempts to attack Belgorod with significant number of drones. Most of the drones were brought down by the Russians. On this video, for example, we can see the result, and not just the results, the process of work of Ukraine, of Russian air defense forces. A lot of spots, let's say, on the sky, which confirms destroyed Ukrainian drones. We see the work of S-300 systems, significant number of missiles. The entire division of air defense forces was redeployed in the vicinity of Belgorod. So basically, the Russians were completely prepared for any provocations and any attempts on sabotage operations from the Ukrainians. After the Russians repelled the attacks during those days, those hours, they managed to discover as well the Ukrainian positions, command centers, headquarters inside of Kharkiv. During the day, there were at least 4 explosions inside of the Kharkiv. Then we got some pictures and geolocations confirming very heavy explosions, fire. Probably the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian command centers, headquarters, and so on. And that was the end of the battle. So once again, to summarize, the Ukrainians made an attempt, that the attacks were repelled, they had a lot of losses and were forced to fall back. As a result, Ukrainians lost 234 soldiers, half a battalion, 7 tanks, 3 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and 2 armored personnel carriers. Okay, and the final thing, the final stage of this discussion of the front line, of course, what is going to be next, and what the Ukrainians are planning to do. Of course, we can speculate, we can make a lot of projections that the Ukrainians will try to attack until the end of president elections in Russian Federation, or many other topics and many other things. But I think that it's better to use, not to speculate or make any projections, but to compare this operation with the operation that took place on the 22nd of May of 2023. If you remember, almost 8-9 months ago, when Bakhmut Artyomovsk was captured by the Russians, the next day after the fall of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians started their first attacks on the borderlands, and they were attacking the same towns, villages, and cities. Those attacks were also repelled by the Russians. That the previous operation took probably 4 or 5 days, and after the Ukrainians were completely exhausted, somewhere by the end of the May, few days later, the Ukrainians started their greatest counter-offensive operation in Zaporizhzhia direction, and during that operation, I'll remind you, the Ukrainians lost a little bit less than 100,000 soldiers. So now the Ukrainians started the same pattern, the same story. That was just the first days. We'll see what is going to be tomorrow, whether the Ukrainians are planning to repeat the story or not. I believe they will. And after 4 or 5 days of clashes, when the main these proxy forces will be exhausted, very likely the Ukrainians are going to start the primary attack, because these attacks were the secondary, and primary attack, according to my understanding, is going to be the attack towards the Kherson direction with the purpose to establish control over Kinburn and Tendra Spitz. If you remember, Budanov himself, the head of main directorate of intelligence, reported that they're planning to start operation against Crimea and to remind someone from Crimea that to remind them about Ukraine. Once again, operation on the borderlands also is under complete his control, because the forces that were involved in that operation, those Russian proxy forces, is completely under his responsibility. So very likely the Ukrainians will, in the next few days, will start attack towards this area. And the main purpose of this attack is to establish control over the Kinburn and Tendra Spitz, with the purpose to unblock Nikolaev port and to include this port into the Black Sea trade from the Ukrainian side. This is a vital question for them, because we see that the situation on the border with Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania is getting worse and worse, and the situation is going to get worse and worse. So that's why the Ukrainians need very fast to solve the situation with supply support, and the only possible way is to unblock Nikolaev port and to use Odessa, Nikolaev, Odessa region for the global trade. During the previous phase of the special military operation, the Ukrainians more or less managed to stabilize the situation in the Black Sea, forcing the Russian ships to stick as close as possible to the western part of the Black Sea. The Russians just during this year lost up to 3 ships, so the Russians don't have control over the Black Sea, and after unblocking the area, the Ukrainians very likely will have some possibilities to support some level of trade with the world and so on, and this will solve all, at least they think that it will solve their issues with weapon and other things, and of course they will increase their reputation in the face of Western sponsors and so on. Now we are moving further to Donetsk Avdiivka direction. We got a lot of very interesting details from this territory as well. Today we got the video from Nevelske of how the Russian soldiers were trying to half encircle, half cover the village from the east, south and north, and as a result of probably these attacks they managed to do this because this video was published at 11 a.m. and according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, according to the report that was published somewhere at 2 p.m. of the local time, the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the village. So currently this territory is in the Russian control, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back towards the fields to the north and to the west of the village. And the situation for Ukrainians is getting worse because now we see that Ukrainians that located in the rest of Pervomaiska and in the fields in this main stronghold currently appeared in a small encirclement, at least in operational encirclement, and obviously the situation for them is going to get worse and worse. Very likely the Ukrainians during the upcoming night are going to counterattack the Russian positions, trying to return their positions, but unlikely they're able to do this. And to understand the the real problem of the Ukrainians on this direction, it's better to to update the map according to different mappers. For example, according to different mappers, reliable sources, this is approximately the progress of the Russian forces in Pervomaiska, at least let's say by Syriac. Furthermore, if you remember, according to the same mappers, the Russians have already established control over this part of Pervomaiska, which is also very likely under complete Russian control. And of course, from this perspective, we see that the situation in Pervomaiska for the Ukrainians in this cauldron is even worse than we just see. Furthermore, I'll remind you that according to my understanding of the situation, after the Russians established control over Nevelske, and I'll remind you that this village is located on the hill and it's the highest position between Krasnohorivka and further and Orlovka, and from this area the Russians can see everything, and for the Ukrainians it will be very difficult to hold their defense along the tree lines that located further to the west or to the north of the settlement. So that means that during the next few days, very likely, not days, maybe weeks, the Russians will try to establish control over this territory and basically to maintain their positions around Nevelske, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall as far as possible, to fall back as far as possible from the stronghold. And from this perspective, we see that the situation for the Ukrainians is nightmare in possible positions of Pervomaiska. Very likely, the further the Russians are moving to the west or to the north, the more chances that Ukrainians sooner or later will start, let's say, retreat process from these fields towards Nitailova and even further to Karlovka. But the nightmare for the Ukrainians is not going to be ended by the fall of Pervomaisk, because by taking Nevelske, the Russians, of course, will continue movements further to the northwest with the purpose to get as close as possible to this supply road between Karlovka and Nitailova, with the purpose to cut this area and to cut supply Nitailova from the west. From the other side, we know that and we remember that currently the Russians are trying to establish control over Toninka, and the only thing left for the Russians is to establish control over these fields. And if the Russians are able to bypass, then the Russians will be able to reach and to get the operational space and no strongholds, no towns for lots of kilometers to the west until the village by the name of Resnobrodovka, which confirms that very likely the Russians will start movements further to the west with the purpose to establish control over the fields, and very likely they're going to do this. It's not so easy, of course, but it's not going to be very difficult for the Russians after these farms. And if the Russians are able to get this line, of course they will establish complete fire control over the main supply roads that goes from Yasnobrodovka, Nitailova, Yasnobrodovska and this village Umanskaya to Nitailova, and then we see that Nitailova also can appear into cauldron or operational encirclement. So that's why I'm telling you that if the Ukrainians are going to start withdrawing, retreating from Pervomaiska, very likely that they will not stand for a long time in Nitailova, and they will move to Karlovka with the purpose to hold the Russians on the line Maximilianovka, Gostre, Zarena, Khalitsinka, and Nitailova. So this is the next defense belt of armed forces of Ukraine that they will try to hold, let's say, and to slow down the Russians. From the other side, we see that after the fall of Nevelske, the situation is become critical for Krasnohorivka forces as well. I'll remind you that during the previous days we faced and were witnesses of Russian attempts to attack these fields, and we know for sure that the Russians are planning and trying these days to establish control over these fields. Obviously, this is not so easy operation like to draw some polygons on the map, but we understand that this is exactly what the Russians are trying to achieve and tried to achieve during the previous days, and this is exactly what are they going to do the next few days. If the Russians are able to capture these fields and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further to the north and further to the west, the Russians will be able to get very close to the main supply roads that goes to Krasnohorivka as well. The first one goes from Gostre along the railways to the city, and the two more are going, let's say, to the northwestern direction, and the final one goes to the north, let's say, right in front of the Russian positions in Nevelske. So we see that from the southern positions, the Russians do have nice chances to cut this road, and from the northern positions, if the Russians continue advancing, they can cut this road as well. And then the Ukrainians also will be forced to fall back from Krasnohorivka without even clashes for the stronghold. Now we see that just because of fall of one village by the name of Nevelske, we see that this entire defense belt will collapse, and will collapse very soon, and the days of this defense belt obviously are numbered. Now we are moving to Robotyne area, to Zaporizhzhia direction. The clashes inside of the village continues. The Russians continue storming process. Additional mappers updated their maps showing additional Russian control, and we for now are not going to change the map because we don't have 100% strong reliable updates from the territory. The only thing we have is just picture. On this video we can see not the picture of moon or any other object in the space. We can see in front of the screen the area between Robotyne and Novoprokopovka. Every single square centimeter was under very heavy fire, and this is the situation in the area. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to discover and to destroy additional HIMARS system on Zaporizhzhia direction. On this video, we can see the HIMARS system, and a few moments later, the Russians attacked the territory with Tornado S rocket. We see lots of parts, very heavy explosion, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost another HIMARS system in direction. So very heavy losses, as you can see. When talking about other territories, no changes. The clashes continues in Ivanovskaya, the clashes continues in Kupinsk direction, but no changes on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.